Welcome to the Contact in the Desert 2024 edition of Neon Galactic, Part 4. I'm your host, James Falk. Thanks for joining us. If you follow the UFO, UAP, NHI subject very deeply at all, you know that there are serious and sensible people involved who claim to be having deeply transformative, at times horrific, at other times miraculous experiences that don't fall neatly into normal human categories. These memories and experiences often catch them by surprise and make them consider the universe in a new and disorienting way. Seemingly, all the old notions about what's real and what's true get undermined, and these folks are forced to grok things and themselves in a new and often alien way. One presenter at this year's Contact in the Desert has had more to do with the world waking up to the reality of this phenomenon and these experiences than any other. Writer Whitley Strieber was one of the earliest experiencers to go public with this story through his wildly popular book, Communion, and several succeeding volumes. But he paid a price. The deep trauma of his encounters enthralled readers, even as his most acute experience of rape at the hands of some mysterious other made him the brunt of jokes on cable television, destroying his literary career and resulting in the loss of a home. In this conversation, we talk about his journey, his current research, his deceased wife, Anne, and how his spiritual quest may have played a part in prompting his original visitations. We also discuss some of the more baffling encounters and the power of love in human relationships to help us all face the challenges we're assigned in this life. We also discuss his sense that something looms in the near future for humanity and what people can do to secure a place in what comes after. Strieber exudes honesty and a wisdom earned from deep searching and an unrelenting examination of what things mean. I don't know how anyone who listens to a story with their full attention and an open heart can walk away unmoved. Somewhere in the twists and turns of his unfolding narrative, the human condition is laid bare and our spirits affirmed. This is a production of KEET-TV. Please enjoy, and don't forget to like and subscribe. When I was a kid, I read Communion, and it horrified me. I've never had experiences like that, but your book opened my eyes to that possibility that those kinds of things could occur. And over the past 5 or 6 years, I've been doing a lot of research, interviewing experiencers, and going into it, I had a perception of who people were, and having these conversations with folks, I'm finding that they're utterly authentic, believable. And when I have conversations with them, I can sort of feel the truth oozing out of them a lot of the time. So it's the explanations that some people have about these events, saying that they're either made up or psychoses or whatever, is insufficient. And I think that your work is probably the most important work in terms of giving the whole subject some intellectual bona fides, to put it, whatever. So I appreciate that, and I wanted to first talk about, you've been, since, I guess, was it 85 this happened, or 88?
No, 85.
Okay.
It happened in 85.
Yeah. Since that day happened, you've gone through this whole arc where you, had some success, and then, like you said, you lost your house at one point because of South Park and that sort of thing. But here you are now, all these years later, doing UFO conferences. I wanted to ask you why you think it's important to stay close to the community like that, and how you describe your mission in terms of conducting these events and writing your books and the research you do.
You end up with a mission with this thing. And in my case, it was because I was scorned and laughed at that I took it on. If they hadn't laughed at me, I might have gone on to other things, but they did laugh at me.
Yeah.
And that made me mad. And I kept on. But there are two things about this experience that are amazing. One is that it happens at all, and two is the way the world reacts to it. Because that reaction isn't natural. It should be curiosity, not what is happening. Yeah. Like what was put on South Park, jokes about my rape.
Yeah.
I was raped, and that's not funny.
No, it's not.
And but it's there because people are afraid and they're angry. They don't want to believe it's true, and then they see this and they get scared and they're angry at being frightened, and they lash out. That's what that's about.
Yeah.
And so you can't really blame them, but you can say that they should have looked a little bit more harder into themselves.
Yeah.
To try to get to the point where they could understand that if you turn someone's rape into a joke, that's very cruel.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And but they, I think they came from the place with, it's not real. He's lying, therefore we can punish him this way.
Yeah.
That was the idea.
Yeah.
And the whole witness close encounter thing is just fraught with that kind of tension, of the friction with family, friction with coworkers, friction with the public, friction with the media. But it's much less now than it was in 1986 or in 88 when I started being in the public eye.
Yeah.
That was intense.
Yeah.
It was intense for many years.
Yeah.
But people are gradually coming to realize that, yeah, something happens to these people.
Yeah.
And it's not explainable yet.
Yeah. There is nothing else in modern life that is so fraught with like mystery, and you can't pin down like where the truth or the reality is, because like for one thing, like I think you have written and said over and over again, the phenomenon itself wants to maintain the secrecy and sort of keep us guessing, as if that's part of what its whole mission is. And I think that people have struggled to come to terms with all these different people's experiences, but there are so many that are piling on top of each other, and they are pushing people to change. And
Yes.
I think the witnesses themselves, how would you say that, I mean, from your earlier work, I know that you were into Gurdjieff, right?
Yeah.
Who's the guy who wrote the book about him, In Search of the Miraculous?
P.D. Uspensky.
P.D. Uspensky, yeah. I think I read in one of your books that you felt like maybe that work had kind of made you stand out to the phenomenon.
Well, one specific thing did make me stand out to the phenomenon. I know how this worked now.
Okay, cool.
There's, in the Gurdjieff system, there's something called the sensing exercise, which is where you split your attention and you place some of your attention on your physical body. And it turned out they saw me when I did that. And when I did it in the country at night, I used to do it every night, and I still do it. In fact, I do it 4 times a day now. I'm very busy with it.
Yeah.
Because it turns out to be, for me, an important communications tool. They would see this little glow, and I asked them at one point years ago, "Why did you come?" And they said, "We saw a glow." And I thought that meant like the glow of cities and things.
Yeah.
Then, after my wife Annie passed away, I was at a William Henry conference in Nashville, and he gives these beautiful conferences about Renaissance art and the way it relates to the hidden meanings and esoteric. They're so good.
Yeah.
So I was there. We used to go there all the time together, Annie and I did, and so it was really a nice time to be, and I was very grief-stricken. It was just a few weeks after she passed on. Yeah. And in one of the breaks, this woman comes up to me and says, "Mr. Strieber, I want to tell you something, but I'm not sure I should because it's so strange." And I said to her, "Look, you don't worry about strange with me." So she says, "I just heard your wife's voice in my ears, clear as a bell." She knew Ann's voice, of course, from the radio.
Yeah.
Said, "Tell Whitley I can see him when he sits in the chair." And I thought, that's when I do the exercise.
Yeah.
And the glow is that. Oh. And I understood all these years later what the glow was. And so I started doing that more.
Yeah.
I mean, I was doing it anyway every night. And then they started waking me up at 3 o'clock in the morning to do it. And so I started doing it at 11 at night and at 3 in the morning. And, it was not easy, but they would wake me up by, the first time they electrified one of my toes. And I thought, I jumped out of bed and I thought, holy moly, you've got gout. So I immediately Googled gout, and that was not the symptom.
Yeah.
And so it's not gout. I think maybe there's something wrong with the electricity. And I was trying to see if there were any cords back under the bed, and there's nothing.
Yeah.
So I went back to sleep. The next night, someone grabbed one of my nipples and pinched it real hard. And I just shot up out of that bed.
Yeah.
And I thought, I remembered they tried to get me to do it at 3 o'clock in the morning back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And so I started doing it at 3. And from then for 7 years, they used to wake me up every night at 3 in one way or another.
Yeah.
And it became like a fun, you know, it would be like a school bell going off in the living room and stuff. And why a school bell? Well, it turns out that this is a famous time of awakening and learning in yoga.
Yeah.
It's called Brahma Muhurta time, the time where the mind is most open to new things. And then, you know, I had this implant that was put in my ear in 1989, and I never knew how to use it.
Yeah.
But now, at that hour, it works, and I just have to open my mind, and it will find what I need to know.
Yeah.
And it has become the most incredible research tool and editor any writer could hope to have.
Yeah.
I've written A New World, Jesus, A New Vision, Them, and now my new book, all using it.
Yeah. Can you, I mean, this is a little, I guess it's not off topic, it's right on topic. How does that work? I mean, how do you interface with it when you're writing? I like to write. I mean, I'm interested in how that helps your process.
Well, you have to be open inside in a certain way.
Yeah.
There's a place in us that's always kind of talking.
Yes.
And when you do this exercise, which we call the integration exercise now, because it's integrating the body and the soul into one being. When you take your attention out of the flow of thought, even a little bit, it gives it room.
Yeah.
And things will come in. It's like an inspiration.
Yeah.
But more than that, it has other functions, such as if I have something I need, some information, it'll come to me.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in my head, but like an example, I was writing a book. The first time I learned to use this, I was writing a novel about Nazis, and it was set in the 40s and 30s, and it had to be very realistic. You know, in other words, it had to be. It was a sort of a faux memoir, and since the fictional character was living in the period, it had to have every detail of the period perfect.
World building, right? I mean,
Exactly,
details
and you know what type of every detail has to be, and those details were quite hard to find, but not with this.
Yeah.
With the implant, all I had to do was think about it.
Yeah.
And I needed, for example, stuff about Hitler's personal life, like what toothpaste brand did he use and things like that, stuff you just can't find. And all of a sudden, Google turned into the German version of it. Or no, excuse me. It was Amazon. I was on Amazon and looking for stuff about Hitler. And suddenly it turns into the German version. And there's this memoir sitting there from one of Hitler's valets, which of course tells all kinds of things about his
personal life
stuff.
Yeah.
So I buy it. I think gold.
Yeah.
Perfect. It comes. It's in German. I read no German, and then I go to some friend's house, and I tell them the story. And this lady there says, "Well, Whitley, you know I am German. I can read it. Give it to me. I'll translate it for you."
Yeah. Wow.
And she just happened to be there that night.
Yeah. Perfectly lined up. Like
it's all. That's how it works. And you have to open yourself to the idea that this is something that's working for you.
Yeah.
That this didn't just happen. It's not a coincidence to be dismissed. This is someone or something making an effort on your behalf.
Yeah.
And I learned by writing the Hitler book how to use it. It was like practice.
Yeah.
Now, my ability to use it is far more sophisticated because I can ask very subtle questions, and it is starting to direct me to AI prompts, to make AI prompts.
So do you think it's a form of AI?
I don't know.
Yeah, right.
But if it is, it has a wonderful sort of joyous, humorous gestalt to it. And you could build that into an AI,
Sure.
of course.
Yeah.
But
it's like your voice.
It's really fun to use.
Yeah.
It's fun to work with, I should say. I don't want to say use because it feels like a partner, like a friend.
Yeah.
And once, it opens a slit in my eye where you see words racing past, and you can't read them. And a couple of men who know about this stuff, and I'm not going to, unfortunately, get into too much detail about them,
Okay, yeah.
told me that what it's doing is the words you can't read is drawing material up from your unconscious closer to your consciousness, so you can access things that you know but you've forgotten.
So is that what you're seeing in the
In
words?
the slit, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And one day I said to it, "Who are you?" And the slit slows down and it says very clearly, "It's me, Anne, my wife from the other side, who was a brilliant genius anyway. And now she's there, and I think she's working with me on my books."
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. I've been with my wife 30 years, so I understand
boy.
close, loving relationships. And
The
I'm
guy
sorry for
does
your
not
loss.
want to be the first to go, "I'm no good at being a bachelor."
Yeah, I hear that. I wouldn't be either. I
No.
wouldn't even know how to begin.
Well, she taught me how to cook at least, so I can cook.
Yeah. So there's a couple things I wanted to ask you about. Yesterday during your talk, you said you were mentioning how some people describe these as a spiritual journey or whatever, but you said yours was not a spiritual journey and that you have a spiritual path, thank you very much, and it's good but different. But it does seem like some people who have these experiences, Matthew Roberts for one, who was featured in a recent documentary, somehow these events trigger a religious or spiritual journey, and they begin going back through, say, like the perennial philosophy or Hermeticism, and they discover this whole hidden vein of knowledge that maybe they didn't know about before or they only knew about on the surface, but it kind of changes the way that they understand reality. Did that happen to you? I know that you're into that sort of stuff, and can you talk about how that has impacted how you grok all of this and how you process it and anything else?
It's had a huge impact because I started out on a spiritual journey even before I was involved with the Rajiv Foundation.
Okay.
And so I was already on a profound spiritual journey when the visitors showed up in my life.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't say I thought I was very advanced at the time. I know now that I was just starting out. And I know now that in this life we're always just starting out with this journey. It's just the beginning here.
Yeah.
But in any case, so I was already kind of on a journey, and I'm still on the same journey, but they have definitely participated in it. But the most participation has come from our own dead. When Annie walked out of her office one day, she was reading all these letters we used to get, thousands of them, which are, by the way, now archived at Rice University in something called the Archive of the Impossible.
Jeff Kripal.
And so she comes out of her office and she says, "You know, Whitley, this has something to do with what we call death." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I see so many letters where they see the visitors and the dead, their own dead relatives and stuff. And that would happen in our cabin." She was very good at choosing people to come up to the cabin who would be interesting to the visitors who were coming to the cabin a lot. And we would have groups, and they would come to meet the people in the groups. That happened numerous times, but almost always, either in the context of their arrival or before they came, someone would have an extraordinary experience with a dead friend or relative. And whenever that happened, Annie would say to me, "Your friends will be here later tonight." God, I wonder how she knew what she knew. I don't even know who my wife was or is.
Well, I mean, and in your book, she's always sort of the person who directs you in the right direction
Right,
before
exactly.
it breaks, you know?
She was the one who decided to call the book Communion.
Yeah.
Whitley, it's going to be called Communion because that's what it's about. She knew these things.
Yeah.
she set up her own relationship, her own ability to contact me and thousands of other people from afterlife. In my belief, she is the only person who ever consciously created an avatar for herself while she was alive and knew she was dying.
Yeah.
Before I did. In January of 2015, she suddenly says to me, I want you to memorize a poem, and it's called Song of the Wandering Aengus. And I didn't do it because I'd never memorized a poem before in my life. And she burst into tears a few days later when she saw that I hadn't been working on it, and she said, you have to memorize it. And part of the poem is this: when white moths are on the wing and the moth-like stars are flickering out, and that sentence is very important, because after she passed on, this white moth started appearing in front of the surveillance cameras in my house. I mean, you can imagine a person like me is going to have a lot of surveillance cameras.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So cool things have happened too. I mean, I've got
some
very interesting stuff on it. No grays,
Yeah.
but interesting stuff for sure.
Yeah.
In any case, someone at a conference says to me, I'm at a conference and I'm looking at this thing because my phone is texting me that there's movement in the living room. And since there's nobody there, I'm concerned. And I'm seeing this white moth flying back and forth in front of the camera.
Yeah.
And of course, being me, I'm not getting it. And the other person at the conference looks at it and says, you know, that's something more than an ordinary moth. And I said, yeah, I can tell. Ordinary moth doesn't fly back and forth in front of a camera in the middle of the day.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I went back to the house. When I went back to the house, there was no sign, and it was not small. It hadn't died anywhere in the house. The house was completely closed up. That was the beginning of the white moth experience. And then I remembered Anne's favorite short story of mine was called The White Moths. And it is about an old woman discovering that she has died. Yeah. And I thought, my God, Anne has created an avatar. This white moth is the symbol of her presence. And so I wrote the whole book, The Afterlife Revolution. And I went to the Esalen Institute where we had a conference. Yeah. And I presented my book at the conference. And I talked about the white moth. And the conferees all went up to lunch we were in a conference area, and then went up to lunch in the dining hall. And everyone's sitting around this big table, and a white moth comes and flies around the table. and everyone's laughing and clapping. It's just February. There's not a lot of moths around.
Yeah.
So then we have, a few days later, the final banquet. And, you know, everyone's done different presentations, and my presentation was good, but, you know, everyone is good at those conferences.
Sure,
These are experts.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we're in a different context, in a different room, and there's a big fireplace, and it's a smaller room, and a white moth appears and starts flying around, and everyone's applauding and everyone's laughing. And then a podcaster Anne really loves, Jeremy Vaney, was there. Yeah. And the white moth lands on his head. And I got a great picture of it. And then it goes off, flies into the middle of the room, and before everybody's eyes, it's just suddenly gone. It's not like a magic trick. It's just not there anymore. It's like it's not in reality anymore. Very strange. Yeah. And I thought that was all incredibly cool, and it created a relationship with my wife, not only for me, because I talk a lot, it's my job, but many people have relationships with Anne because they see the white moth at critical moments in their lives. Yeah. You know, there's one guy whose wife was dying, and he was beside her in the bed, and suddenly out of nowhere, a white moth lands on her forehead, and she dies. And then it flies away. And he said, Whitley, I want to thank you. This was the most precious thing that ever happened to me in my life. And I thought, Annie, thank you.
Yeah, that is amazing and beautiful.
Yeah, it sure is. I mean, you know, in the West, we've gone soul blind because we're so fixated in the material world.
Exactly right. Everything's about accumulating or figuring out, by breaking things apart and getting into finer detail, but we miss the holistic, you know, broader experience.
Yeah, there's a big billionaire. I won't mention his name. It's not anyone you would know.
Yeah.
And him being, I don't ever mention the names of people I have these conversations with.
Yeah.
Who wanted to know more about this, and I wanted to actually just talk to me, and so he flew me to his home in New York, and I went and spent a couple hours talking to him like this. And I thought to myself when I was doing this, he flies me to his home, and it's all very fancy and everything, and he could have just watched a show. You know, there's plenty of shows like this. I'm not going to say anything I didn't say on the show. So anyway, when I talked about the afterlife, it was like talking to a wall. He couldn't feel it. And I thought, he's so mired in the material world with big jets and this fabulous, unbelievable entire floor on the 70th floor of an apartment building. It must cost him millions and millions of dollars and all this money. And he's actually totally impoverished and lost. And the visitor, the old lady, would always say to me, "You are very poor in this world." And she meant poor in spirit. And he was that way, rich in material but poor in spirit. And I tried to keep in touch with him, but he went on, drifted on away. He was just sort of sampling.
Maybe sensing that he was missing something, but not knowing how to,
you
know?
That he was missing something, but you know, he wanted me to tell him all kinds of classified stuff about the visitors. I probably know some classified stuff, I'm sure I do, but I don't know, since I have no security clearance and have never seen a classified document in my life, except on TV. I don't know whether, you know, I know anything classified or not.
One question I have for you, and this is something that applies to, I mean, I would say probably like 4 or 5 people that I kind of put on your level in terms of involvement in the phenomenon and the discussions. I mean, people like Gary Nolan and, you know, sort of the stars in my mind, legends to me. But how do you grok things when you're perplexed about the issue? You mentioned that some people who know what is going on here had told you something about your implant. I know you can't talk more about the names or anything like that, but I am curious.
I don't know their names.
Okay, interesting.
I don't even know if they were physically alive.
Okay.
It was. I'll tell you more about the experience. I don't have to. I'm not going to be that mysterious about it. What happened was this: a doctor who does a neurologist, became interested in the implant and wanted me to get a CT scan of it, which I did. And it shows up very clearly. It's metal, and it's right here. It's not. There's no question about its existence. And they became concerned, whoever's on the other side of the implant. So remember, going back, I need to sort of back and fill here for a second. The implant was put in May of 1989 by 2 people, a man and a woman.
And they were sort of like an attack, right? I mean,
well, it was an attack. I mean, you know, it's an attack when somebody comes into your house without permission at 11 o'clock at night. That qualifies as an attack, and I've reacted that way. But I was not fast enough with my shotgun, believe me. Thank God I wasn't, because it was actually one of the most important things that ever happened to me. And at the time, of course, I was like a scared animal. I was, I was exactly what I was.
Fight or flight, right?
Right, exactly. And but they successfully overpowered me and got it in and left. Now, fast forward to the next part of this answer to the question. I backed and I filled. Now, I'm in the house. This is a Tuesday. The CT scan is scheduled for Thursday. And I'm a little worried, would the CT scan screw up the implant, which it did not. And they said it wouldn't. And suddenly at 4 o'clock in the morning, rap, 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 on the door. And I figured it's the 3 a.m. wake up an hour late, because it was not a normal knock. And I thought, should I open the door? And I thought I didn't have a camera doorbell then. So I look out and I can sort of see these shadows. And I think to myself, maybe I'm going to open the door on the Greys. And I think, you can't say no again. So I open the door. And there's two guys who I remember, but I don't remember where.
From
I remember,
where, yeah.
They're very familiar to me.
Yeah.
They come in, and they are very sweet, and one of them doesn't talk. The other one very politely says, Whitley, we want to tell you about your implant and how it works. And we sit down. They look totally human. They're a couple of men, and they look like in their 30s or 40s.
Just a white men or blonde like Nordics, or
No, they were human looking.
Okay, yeah.
Completely. I don't remember. I don't really see black and white very well, and so I'm, I don't remember what their race was at all. But so I'm there, and they explain it, what I told you a few minutes ago. They explain how it brings up stuff from the unconscious, and and how that better to use it, techniques. And then they say a very interesting thing. One of them didn't talk, the other one talked. The one that talked says, it was designed by, he said, Konstantin Rodive. And I thought, that doesn't make, I don't know that name. Okay, then they leave, and the second they leave, of course, I'm on Google again, Konstantin Rodive, who's this? And it turns out I did know who it was, but they mispronounced his name. His name was Konstantin Rodive, and he was a world expert on EVP, electronic voice phenomenon. And he achieved incredible things of contacting the spirit world using electronics. And I think this was designed by him after his death.
Sort of like W.H. Myers when from the American they did a bunch of apparently post-death work to try to figure out ways to communicate better with living people.
I did not know this until now, but that's exactly what I think this is.
Okay, interesting.
And it is connecting me not to aliens, but to our dead. And that's why my wife is using it.
Yeah.
And I just can't tell you how precious it is to me.
I bet.
And I think to myself, if only we could all get these.
Yeah.
If only we could. And I know one other guy who has one.
Same. I say make and model, but
he doesn't have he doesn't have this.
Okay.
But he does get the slit in his eye and the words racing through it.
Okay.
And he is one of the world's leading experts on Konstantin Rodive. And he had no idea about this. I talked to him, mentioned this, because I called him to ask him about Rodive. And he said, well, that's the strangest thing, Whitley, because I've had that slit in my eye for years, and I've often wondered what it was about. And I said, well, I can tell you now.
Yeah.
And he said, well, there must be one of these implants somewhere in my body. And I said, yeah, there must be.
Yeah. So, I mean, that brings me to the question that I often struggle with. I mean, is this a spiritual question? Are these different, kingdoms and phylums of a spiritual reality? Or there is some physicality to the visitors, so that has to be reckoned with. But what are we dealing with? I mean, it seems like there's two different issues at play. One might be our sort of our souls and us in death, before and after, or sort of our spirit reality. And then there might also be a dimensional or alien element that's outside of that, maybe preying on our souls, which is something else you talked about in them, where we're kind of like a herd, maybe maintained for some kind of food for this.
I think if we lead unexamined lives, we may forfeit our control over our souls.
Okay,
I think
that is huge.
Yeah, I think you have to take a hold of yourself. And maybe one of the reasons these sometimes fairly predatory beings are around this super materialistic part of the world, because you don't find them in India very much, for example. Is because there's lots of souls that are available. Wow. Like that billionaire couldn't. Yeah. He has no contact with his own soul. And I know people, in fact, I know many people who would just say, I don't have a soul. I don't believe that. Yeah. And if you don't attend to yourself, if you're not a good householder, then I think when you die, you're just available. Yeah. I think that. Yeah. I worry about it a lot, because I've been face to face with some things that were predators. Yeah. And they were predators on a non-physical plane, and you knew it immediately. Yeah. And in fact, once some of them showed up at our house and knocked on the cabin and knocked on the roof, these 9 knocks, and our cats reacted unbelievably. Yeah. The cats were there, and you know, a cat's tail puffs up when it's excited or frightened. Yeah. The whole cat puffed up. And it was hilarious on the one hand, but it was very instructive on the other, because these cats were scared beyond anything I'd ever known that they could be. And they moved along the back of the couch, crouched down, yowling, with the entire cat puffed up. They looked like a couple of caterpillars. And I thought, they're knocking on my door, and my cats are telling me very clearly, don't open that door. Yeah. And I didn't. And I thank my cats. Yeah. And of course, then the other part of me wonders, what if you had? And they were just scared because they didn't understand. And it would have changed everything. Yeah. You just don't know. But then that gets back to the power of the question. Mm-hmm. We talked about that a few minutes ago. Annie used to say, in this life, she said, the human species is too young to have beliefs. What we need are good questions. Absolutely. And this is a good question. Boy. Yeah.
Well, and that goes back to some of the arguments you make in your work, and that Jeff Kripal also makes, where don't take anything off the table. Like, we have all these things going on, and we're chasing after little things, but then we'll start the conversation by saying, okay, these things are impossible, so we're not going to talk about those. Right. But those are right at the heart of what's happening, so we can't proceed that way and include the things that we need to include.
No, and we have a lot of problems with that in this community, because like, for example, Chris Mellon, David Grush, Lou Elizondo will not even interview on my radio show. Yeah. They won't talk to me. They don't want anything to do with any of the abductees. There's one abductee, and I'm not going to name this abductee, is sort of friendly with the government. Mm-hmm. And they will interface with him a little bit, but they won't come near me. And that has to change. Yeah. I went to the Soul Foundation conference, which was organized by my good friend Gary Nolan, and wonderful people, organizers. And I was not invited to speak. And Gary said to me, I can't do it, Whitley, because if I invite you to speak, half the people that are there will not come. And I said, you know, I'm coming anyway. I said, well, I'm going to ask questions from the floor. And so I made the presence of the experience known by asking questions from the floor, which was the best I could do. We have to get past this. Yeah. We have to accept the fact that the mystery is part of the question. Yeah. And we, the experiencers, are the mystery. And we are part of the question also.
Absolutely right. And I think that there's been this, I mean, for instance, there was recently a Twitter, right? There was a Twitter battle about people arguing about what people should be talking about with disclosure and what should be included in that conversation. And one segment of the group was saying basically, well, if you start talking about the close encounter phenomenon, you're going to scare everybody away. So let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the shiny ships in the sky, or the fast-moving spaceships.
Yeah, that's what David Grush and Lou and Chris have all decided. And Chris, I like Chris. He's a good friend. Sure. I mean, I wouldn't say he's a friend. He's an acquaintance, but he's a good acquaintance. We have nice conversations together when we're together. Yeah. I have no problem with these guys. Yeah. But they have a difficulty with this end of it, with my end of it. And they've got to figure out how to get past that, because this is ultimately never going to be about the materials.
Yeah.
It is never going to be about whether or not UFOs are real. It is always going to be primarily about the human experience. And that's the experiencers, that's the close encounter witnesses.
Yeah. Do you think that, I mean, in this, we talked about sort of this, maybe there's two elements that are sort of going at us, one being the visitors and one maybe being ourselves, either our souls or the dead or some connection like that. Do you think that we're the center of that, or are we sort of, again, is that just a sign of our arrogance to assume that we're that valuable?
If we weren't valuable, they wouldn't be here.
Amen.
I've had a fair amount of contact with the Greys over the years, and they are not going to do a darn thing that isn't valuable to them.
Yeah.
I mean, they are parsimonious to a fault. You know, so yeah, they're here because something valuable to them is here.
Yeah.
And it's almost certainly us.
When you mentioned the predatory beings, I mean, the Greys, I think you would include in that category, or at least
some of them.
Yeah.
It's a very complex presentation.
Yeah.
Very complex. And there's many different levels to it and many different forms, even the physical forms. There are some physical forms of the Greys that are bio-robots, but highly intelligent.
Yeah.
And they don't have like genitals. There are others who do have functional genitals, believe me. And they have a sort of human-like gestalt to them that's very different from the ones that you might see in a UFO. And they are vividly alive. The one on the cover of Communion is an example of that. Yeah. She was a living woman, and she adopted our family, and she was in our house for months. I mean, she came back, and yeah. She became involved with us. And our son once had a friend up who had stuck his tongue in a light socket when he was 3 years old, and he had a scar on his face. Mm-hmm. And he's this very sweet, very bright boy, and they were about 10 or 11 at the time, and we liked him a lot. But she did not buy into that act at all. And so that night when he was there, she kept showing up at my bedside, and she would wake me up, but put me into a state of not physically able to move, because she did absolutely, any touching had to come from her direction, not mine. Yeah. And then she'd be peering in me in the face with smoke, images of smoke pouring out of the side of her mouth. And then she came 3 or 4 times, and then she would put images in my head of my son going to his house, the boy's house, in a cab, and the cab driver abducting him and stuff. And we lived in Lower Manhattan. The kids took cabs all the time. Yeah, yeah. And so in the morning, I said to Ann, she doesn't like Douglas very much, the boy. And then I went to wake the boys up to get breakfast. And he says, Mr. Strieber, his bed in the boys' room was directly across from the door, and my son's was in the corner under a window. Mm. So he says, Mr. Strieber, these long fingers with black claws on the end of them kept coming around the door and tapping and scratching up and down the door all night. I couldn't sleep. I said, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry to hear that. He said, can you take me home today? We never saw him again. Yeah. And I thought, she scared him off. Yeah. Because that was her hands. She had these fingers, the long four. They were long, and I think that any one of them could have been an opposable thumb, because that's how they worked. Okay. And they were. In my new book, I'm going to explain how their musculature works in detail. Yeah. And the musculature is such that, and the bones are such that they're very snaky. Yeah. Interesting.
So my question though is like, if you have all these predatory elements, would you encourage people to do things like CE5 or other contact modalities? Is that something that's potentially deadly for yourself or for your soul ultimately?
I think you have to look to the health of your soul very seriously when you're doing that. Okay. If you're doing CE5s as an entertainment and you start to get into contact and you're just there for, you're a fourth dimensional tourist, watch out, because there's somebody there and they're gonna take advantage of you in all likelihood if you're not careful. Yeah. You have to be your own person and stand up for yourself and value yourself and your soul as yours. Yeah. And not possessively, but with joy. Yeah. If you bring joy to it, you own it.
Which you were told, right? Have joy.
That's right. Yeah. And that Annie immediately understood that, and she adopted it as her mantra, have joy. Yeah. And you find your joy inside yourself, and it's there. And it's nothing to do with getting a new car or, like we used to say, chanting up a pack of Luckies back in the cigarette days. It's nothing to do with that. I'll tell you where your joy starts. It starts where your humility is. Yeah. Your humility, your regard for others. I asked Annie after she passed on about compassion, and her answer was very immediate and incredibly powerful. She didn't answer directly. She simply said, each of us is all we have. And you look at other people with that in your mind. Mm-hmm. And at the visitors, yeah, with that in your mind. Yeah. And you really feel that this person out here is the same as me. Yeah. This is all they have. And all of a sudden, your soul is growing. Yeah. And it belongs to you then.
Yeah. Wow. That sort of leads to what I would call my final question, and it's 10. I appreciate your time and patience. But one of the things that you talk about in your book is that something's coming, whether it's an imminent, whether it's a climate-related catastrophe or something along those lines. You talk a little bit about population dynamics and how potentially we're in the middle of a die-off and what's causing it, and yeah, that some of us will survive. That's ultimately your message. My question to you is, from where you sit, is there anything people can do to try and be in that surviving remnant, or is that the wrong way to look at it? Or is it so far off that we don't need to worry about it, or anything you can offer?
It's the wrong way to look at it. Okay. Okay. The human being, the body, either came out or was designed to have a sell-by date. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is this. We are very smart. We have excellent memories. And by the way, the visitors consider us very smart. They don't consider us stupid.
That's interesting.
Yeah, actually, bear that in mind. And in the new book, I'm going to explain exactly how the brains are different and why that's true of us, and how our intelligence is different. I've learned a lot about this lately, and so it's all going to be in, it's called the fourth mind, and it'll all be in the fourth mind.
Excellent. Yeah.
Anyway, you have to really, I use the implant during these conversations, and it flipped off. It's done that once before, and now I don't remember what we were talking about. Just say the question again.
We were talking about how can people try to be a part of that surviving remnant,
okay,
or if that's the wrong way to think about it.
I got it back again. Okay. No, I'm working with it at all times during a conversation like this. So, okay, we have to go back to the way we were either designed or came out, and that is a high level of intelligence, no fur, no seasonality, great big genitals stuck in the front, and that's going to lead to too many people, and it did. Yeah. And Thomas Malthus had it right in the 1750s, 1745, or whenever he wrote his book, that there would be a situation where we would go up the ascending side of a bell curve. Then we're going to taper off, which is happening now, and then we're going to go down the other side of the bell curve. This is nothing to do with us being right or wrong. we have intelligence, and therefore we can ameliorate this to some degree.
Yeah.
But in fact, the planet is too overpopulated, and it's going to get less one way or another.
Yeah,
If we intervene in the right ways, the decline in population will be more organized, in the sense that people will start having fewer babies and each person will get smaller. And what I mean by that is this: technology makes each of us smaller, but with less of a footprint. Like in 1890, we all had huge footprints because we were burning coal, we were burning wood, we were using kerosene and candles everywhere. But now we have a huge amount of light, cooling systems, all of this stuff. But we actually are, on an individual basis, far less stressful toward the environment than we were then.
Yeah.
Because of technology.
Yeah. And
like we're in a state, we're in California right now, and 66% of this state's energy is now from renewables. Yeah. And other states are way ahead too. Texas, a very conservative Republican state, has a huge amount of renewables going. And other countries all over the world. And this is just in the past 10 years, this is all changing massively.
Yeah.
And so that's going to affect this. We're in a race, basically. Do we do a controlled reduction, which is two things: reducing population and reducing the size of the individual with technology that makes the individual's impact on the environment less and less? Mm-hmm. I think we'll win.
Yeah.
I'm very optimistic. But if we don't win and the whole thing falls apart, some glacier causes the place to drown or something, then we'll have to live that.
Yeah.
And whoever's left, it's going to be largely a matter of chance.
Yeah. Well, the other interesting, I think, corollary to that is that this isn't the only reality, right? I mean, if the dead go somewhere, if you attend to yourself, maybe.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
That's the hope, right?
Right.
And
well,
so,
if you build a strong soul, you're gonna survive in the afterlife in a coherent state. My wife taught me. I mean, she knew how to do that, and she did it. Yeah. And she is totally intact now. Believe me. Yeah. I had an experience with her at 3 o'clock this morning that was incredibly profound.
Yeah.
And at 11 this evening, 11 yesterday evening too, with friends, where I don't personally remember it, but apparently she used my body. In other words, I channeled my own wife.
Wow.
And I did not know I was doing this. They knew that they could tell that something had changed during the meditation we were doing together, and they questioned her. And I have vague memories of the questions, but no memory of the answers. And then at 3, I went into the meditation at 3:10, and I had a missing time experience and came out of it at nearly 6 a.m.
Yeah.
and had the feeling that my wife was like in me. We were totally in communion with each other.
Yeah. They just gave me the what for. Thank you very much, sir. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.